If I handed two people $100,000 today, who would become wealthier 10 years from now? Most people assume the answer depends on how much they earn afterward. But history suggests something different. Investor and author Morgan Housel writes in The Psychology of Money that doing well with money has little to do with how smart you are and a lot to do with how you behave. That sentence changes everything. Because $100,000 is neither good nor bad. It doesn't automatically create wealth. It simply magnifies the quality of the decisions that follow. One person may spend it on things that lose value over time. Another may use the same amount to acquire productive assets, reduce costly debt, develop valuable skills, or patiently invest for the future. The money is identical. The outcomes are not. Which means the real investment was never the money. It was the thinking behind every decision. And that's where our journey begins. So before we decide where $100,000 should go, we need to ask a more important question: what exactly is money? For most of history, people have worked for money. But the world's best investors eventually reversed that relationship. They put money to work for them. Imagine every dollar you own as a new employee arriving on its first day of work. It walks into your office carrying a resume and asks one simple question: what would you like me to do? That may sound like a strange way to think about money, but it reflects one of the most important ideas in investing. Capital should have a purpose. Management thinker Peter Drucker famously wrote, "There is nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should not be done at all." Money works the same way. A dollar can be invested efficiently and still be invested in the wrong place. That's why great investors don't celebrate simply because they invested. They care about what that investment is expected to accomplish. Will it reduce an expensive financial burden? Will it help a business become more productive? Will it purchase an asset capable of creating value for years? Or will it quietly disappear into something that provides only temporary satisfaction? Think about a small business owner. If she spends $5,000 repainting her office, the room may look better. But if that same $5,000 purchases equipment that allows her to serve twice as many customers, the money has been given a completely different job. The amount didn't change, the assignment did. And that assignment changes the future. Wealth is rarely built because someone earned one extraordinary paycheck. More often, it's built because ordinary dollars were repeatedly given extraordinary jobs. Every dollar you own is waiting for instructions. The question is, are you giving it work that creates tomorrow, or work that disappears today? But here's the challenge. Every dollar can't do everything at once. Before money goes to work, it has to compete for the job. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. Imagine you're the CEO of your own financial life. Every Friday morning, a new employee walks into your office, except this employee isn't a person, it's $1. Before it begins working, you ask a simple question. Why should I hire you? That may sound unusual, but it's remarkably close to how disciplined investors think. Warren Buffett once observed that one of the most important responsibilities of management is capital allocation, deciding where each dollar can create the greatest long-term value. In business, every investment competes for limited resources. Should a company build another factory? Hire more engineers? Develop a new product? Buy back its own shares? Acquire another company? It can't do everything at once. The same principle applies to your personal finances. Imagine 4 opportunities sitting in front of you. $1 says, use me to pay off expensive debt. Another says, invest me in a diversified portfolio that may grow over the long term. Another says, help expand a small business that's already serving customers. And another quietly says, keep me in reserve until a truly worthwhile opportunity appears. None of these choices is automatically right or wrong. The answer depends on your circumstances, your goals, and the opportunities available. That's why experienced investors don't ask, "Where can I put my money?" They ask, "Where can this dollar create the greatest value with an acceptable level of risk?" That's a completely different question. Charlie Munger once remarked, "The big money is not in the buying and selling, but in the waiting." Embedded in that idea is another truth. Sometimes the best decision isn't choosing the first acceptable opportunity. It's patiently waiting for the better one. Every dollar should earn its assignment, because once it's committed, it can't take another job. And that brings us to one of the greatest realities in investing. Capital is always limited, which means every decision automatically closes the door on another. That's where real investing begins. One of the greatest myths about wealth is that rich people can say yes to everything. They can't. In fact, some of the world's most successful investors became wealthy because they learned when to say no. Every dollar has only one destination. Spend it here and it cannot be spent somewhere else. Invest it in one business, and it can't be invested in another. Capital is finite. That's true whether you're investing $1,000 or $1 billion. Economist Thomas Sowell once wrote, "There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs." That may be one of the most important lessons in finance. Every financial decision creates a trade-off. Imagine you own a small manufacturing company with $100,000 available. You could buy a new production machine. You could hire 3 experienced employees. You could launch a national marketing campaign. Or you could strengthen your cash reserves for uncertain times. None of those choices is free. Choosing one means postponing the others. This is why capital allocation is less about finding perfect investments and more about comparing imperfect choices. Jeff Bezos once described Amazon's approach by saying, "Good intentions don't work. Mechanisms do." In other words, successful organizations don't rely on excitement. They rely on disciplined decision-making. The same principle applies to your personal finances. Don't ask, "Can I afford this?" Ask, "What am I giving up by choosing this?" That single question separates consumers from capital allocators, because every yes quietly contains a no. And once you understand that every decision closes another door, you begin asking a completely different question. Not, "Is this a good decision?" but, "Compared to everything else I could do, is this the best one?" That invisible cost has a name. Economists call it opportunity cost. Imagine you're the owner of a successful bakery. Business is growing. Customers are happy. And after several profitable months, you finally have $50,000 available. Now comes the difficult part. What should you do with it? You could buy a larger oven and increase production. You could renovate the store to improve the customer experience. You could open a second location. Or you could keep the money in reserve until a better opportunity appears. None of those choices is obviously wrong. But you can only choose one. This is what economists call opportunity cost, the value of the alternative you give up when making a decision. Nobel Prize-winning economist Thomas Sowell reminds us that there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Every financial decision carries a hidden cost that never appears on a receipt. The investment you didn't make. The business you didn't expand. The skill you didn't learn. The opportunity you chose to postpone. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner, often encouraged investors to think in terms of opportunity cost, comparing every decision against the next best alternative rather than evaluating it in isolation. That's how disciplined investors think. They don't ask, "Will this make money?" They ask, will this create more value than my other options? Because capital isn't measured only by what it earns. It's also measured by what it could have earned somewhere else. Every crossroads looks promising, but wealth is often built by choosing the road that quietly creates the greatest value over the longest period of time. Great investing isn't about making more decisions, it's about making better ones. But sometimes, the best investment isn't buying anything at all. Sometimes the smartest place to send your next dollar is toward removing something that's already working against you. When people receive extra money, their first instinct is often the same. Where should I invest it? But experienced investors usually ask a different question first. What is already working against me? Imagine two people. Both receive an unexpected $20,000. The first immediately invests it in the stock market, hoping to earn an average long-term return. The second notices something else. They're carrying credit card debt with a very high interest rate. Instead of investing immediately, they use the money to eliminate that debt. At first glance, it may seem less exciting. There are no headlines, no impressive investment story. But financially, removing a high borrowing cost can improve their position because it reduces a guaranteed expense, while investment returns are uncertain. Benjamin Graham, widely regarded as the father of value investing, wrote in The Intelligent Investor, "The essence of investment management is the management of risks, not the management of returns." That's an idea many people overlook. Before trying to increase returns, reduce unnecessary risks. Before trying to accelerate, remove the brakes. Think of a rowing boat. You can row harder and harder. But if an anchor is still dragging beneath the water, much of your effort is being wasted. Paying off expensive debt is like lifting that anchor. Suddenly, every future dollar you earn has a greater chance to move you forward. Great capital allocation isn't always about finding the highest return. Sometimes, it's about removing the biggest obstacle. Wealth isn't only built by what you add. It's also built by what you stop losing. Once you've removed what quietly drains your resources, your next dollar becomes much more powerful. The question now changes. Where should that stronger dollar go? The answer isn't to buy more things. It's to own more things that continue creating value. If you've noticed a pattern throughout this series, it's because there is one. Wealth isn't created by money alone. It's created by productive assets. An asset is productive when it continues creating value after you've paid for it. A business serves customers every day. A well-managed rental property provides housing while generating income. A diversified portfolio of productive companies participates in the growth of those businesses over time. Even intellectual property, a book, a song, a software product can continue creating value long after the work is finished. Warren Buffett once said, "If you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you will work until you die." The quote isn't about avoiding work. Buffett himself has worked for decades because he enjoys it. The lesson is that your efforts should eventually create assets that continue producing value beyond today's labor. Think of an apple orchard. A farmer doesn't celebrate because one tree produced fruit this season. He protects the tree, he plants another and then another. Over time, the orchard becomes more valuable than any single harvest. That's exactly how long-term investors think. They don't constantly ask, "What's the next exciting investment?" They ask, "Which productive asset can I strengthen?" This is one reason companies like Berkshire Hathaway have often reinvested profits into acquiring or growing productive businesses instead of chasing short-term excitement. Productive assets create cash flow. Cash flow can be reinvested. Reinvestment creates more productive assets. And that cycle, repeated patiently over many years, becomes one of the quiet engines of long-term wealth. The goal isn't simply to collect assets. The goal is to own assets that continue creating value for other people. Because when you create lasting value, wealth often follows. But there's one productive asset that almost every investor overlooks. It doesn't appear on a balance sheet. You can't buy it on a stock exchange. Yet it may produce the highest return of all. It's you. If I asked you to name the greatest investment in history, what would you say? Berkshire Hathaway? Apple? Real estate? Perhaps, but there's another investment that quietly outperforms many financial assets over an entire lifetime. Your ability to learn. Investor Charlie Munger spent decades encouraging people to become what he called a learning machine. He famously said, "Go to bed smarter than when you woke up." It sounds simple, but over 40 years, that habit can transform an ordinary career into an extraordinary one. Imagine two friends graduating from university. They both earn similar salaries. One spends the next 10 years doing only what their job requires. The other dedicates a few hours every week to learning new skills: communication, sales, leadership, artificial intelligence, finance, negotiation, and technology. At first, the difference is almost invisible, but over time, those small improvements begin to compound. Better decisions lead to better opportunities. Better opportunities lead to higher income. Higher income creates more capital. More capital creates more investment choices. James Clear writes in Atomic Habits, "Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement." Investing works the same way. The greatest return isn't always found in the market. Sometimes it's found in the person making the investment. Skills appreciate. Wisdom compounds. Judgment improves. And unlike many financial assets, knowledge cannot be taken away by a market correction. Every book you read, every mistake you learn from, every skill you patiently develop, becomes another tool for making better decisions tomorrow. The market may reward investors, but life rewards people who never stop improving. Because before your money compounds, your mind must. Once you've invested in yourself, the temptation becomes chasing every new opportunity that appears. But experienced investors know something most beginners don't. Not every opportunity deserves your attention. Every year, the financial world introduces a new obsession. One year it's technology. The next it's cryptocurrency, then artificial intelligence, then real estate, then commodities. Markets change, headlines change, trends change, but one thing never changes: human nature. Warren Buffett once said, "The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient." Notice he didn't say from the unintelligent or from the unlucky. He said from the impatient. Patience isn't passive, it's disciplined. Imagine you're standing at a busy harbor. Ships are constantly arriving. Every captain insists that their destination is the most profitable. But the lighthouse doesn't chase ships. It doesn't move because the tide changes. It simply stands firm, guiding those who choose to follow its light. Great investors build a similar foundation. They don't abandon their principles because a new trend appears on social media. They ask questions. Do I understand this business? Does it create real value? Does it fit my long-term strategy? If the answer is no, they move on. Charlie Munger often reminded investors that big money is not in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting. Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing, it means refusing to confuse activity with progress. Every unnecessary investment carries a cost. Every distraction steals attention. Every impulsive decision weakens discipline. The best investors aren't remarkable because they say yes more often. They're remarkable because they know exactly what deserves a no. Because protecting your capital begins by protecting your attention. But discipline alone isn't enough. Once you've learned to ignore distractions, you still have to make one important decision. How do you actually choose where your money goes? To answer that, you have to stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like a CEO. Imagine you've just become the CEO of a company. Every morning, your desk is covered with proposals. One department wants to hire more employees. Another wants new equipment. Marketing wants a larger budget. Research wants to develop a new product. Finance wants to strengthen cash reserves. You can't approve everything. Not because the ideas are bad, but because resources are limited. That is the job of a CEO. Not making every department happy, but allocating capital where it creates the greatest long-term value. This is exactly how Warren Buffett has described one of the most important responsibilities of management: capital allocation. Whether you're running Berkshire Hathaway or your own household, the principle is the same. Every dollar should justify its existence. Peter Drucker, often called the father of modern management, wrote, "What gets measured gets managed." Successful investors understand this instinctively. They don't simply spend money. They evaluate it. They ask questions before making decisions. What problem does this solve? Will this produce value 5 years from now? What risks am I accepting? What am I giving up by choosing this? Think about Apple. Every year, it generates billions of dollars in profit. Yet management doesn't spend that money simply because it's available. It evaluates whether to invest in research, develop new products, strengthen its balance sheet, or return capital to shareholders. Every decision reflects one question: where will this dollar accomplish the most? That's the question every investor should learn to ask. Because personal finance isn't really about money. It's about decision-making. Every paycheck, every bonus, every business profit is another board meeting. And every board meeting ends with one responsibility: allocate your capital wisely. Great investors don't react to money. They direct it. Like a chess grandmaster, they understand that victory rarely comes from making the most moves. It comes from making the right move at the right time. But here's something even the best CEOs understand. Sometimes, the smartest decision in the room is to make no decision at all. Because patience isn't the absence of action. It's often the highest form of discipline. In investing, doing nothing can sometimes be the hardest decision of all. We often feel pressure to act to buy, sell, or chase the next opportunity. But activity is not the same as progress. Legendary investor Seth Klarman wrote, "The hardest thing is to have the patience to wait for the right opportunity." Think of a gardener holding a seed before the rain. Planting too early can be just as harmful as planting too late. Great investors understand that patience isn't hesitation. It's preparation. The right opportunity is worth waiting for. Because capital invested at the right time often works harder than capital invested in a hurry. And when patience is combined with consistency, small decisions begin producing extraordinary results. People often overestimate what one decision can do and underestimate what hundreds of good decisions can become. James Clear writes in Atomic Habits, "Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement." Investing follows the same principle. One thoughtful decision may seem insignificant today, but repeat that decision consistently over years, and the results become remarkable. Wealth rarely arrives in dramatic moments. It is usually built quietly, one disciplined choice at a time. The goal isn't to make one perfect investment. It's to keep making good decisions long enough for time to reward them. And eventually, those decisions begin buying something far more valuable than money. They begin buying choice. Many people think wealth is measured by what you own. But long-term investors often value something far more important: choice. Morgan Housel writes in The Psychology of Money that the highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, "I can do whatever I want today." That's what thoughtful investing is really trying to buy. The freedom to spend more time with your family. The freedom to start something meaningful. The freedom to walk away from opportunities that don't align with your values. Wealth isn't just about accumulating more. It's about gaining the freedom to choose your own direction. But making those choices wisely depends on one thing: your judgment. Every investment begins long before money changes hands. It begins with a decision. Ray Dalio writes in Principles, "The quality of your life ultimately depends on the quality of your decisions." The same is true of your financial life. Markets will rise and fall. Opportunities will come and go. But good judgment continues paying dividends long after individual investments have been forgotten. That's why the greatest investors never stop learning. They know that improving the decision maker is often more valuable than finding the next investment, because better judgment leads to better outcomes. And when good judgment is repeated over time, something remarkable begins to happen. Your assets start working harder than you do. The wealthiest people don't rely on working harder forever. They build systems that continue creating value. Peter Drucker once observed, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." A well-run business serves customers every day. A carefully built investment portfolio can continue growing over time. A book, a song, or a software product can continue creating value long after the work is finished. The goal isn't to stop working, it's to build something that keeps working because it was thoughtfully designed. Don't just earn an income. Build systems that can outlast today's effort. And when your systems begin working for you, they start giving you something money can never replace: time. People often believe the reward for building wealth is buying more things, but over time, many successful investors discover a different reward: time. Warren Buffett once said, "The most important investment you can make is in yourself." The purpose isn't simply to earn more. It's to gain the freedom to decide how your days are spent. Time with your family, time to create, time to learn, time to contribute. Money can often be earned again. Time cannot. Perhaps the greatest return on investing isn't measured in dollars, but in the freedom to live life on your own terms. And if time is life's greatest gift, then the greatest form of wealth is what continues long after our own time is over. The greatest investors eventually realize that wealth isn't measured only by what they accumulate, but by what they leave behind. Stephen Covey wrote in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, "Live, love, laugh, leave a legacy." A business can outlive its founder. Knowledge can shape future generations. Values can influence families long after possessions are forgotten. True wealth isn't simply about passing on money. It's about passing on wisdom, character, and opportunity. Because the strongest trees were once seeds that someone chose to plant. And that brings us to an important realization: money was never the destination. It was always a tool. Some people spend their entire lives chasing money. But the wisest investors eventually discover that money was never meant to be the destination. It was meant to be a tool. In The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel reminds us, money's greatest intrinsic value is its ability to give you control over your time. Like a carpenter's hammer, money has no purpose on its own. Its value comes from what it helps you build: a stronger family, a meaningful business, a better future. Don't measure wealth by the size of the tool. Measure it by the quality of what you've built with it. And after everything we've explored, there's one final investment that matters more than every dollar you've earned. If you've watched this entire series, You may think we've been talking about $10,000, $50,000, $70,000, $90,000 and $100,000. But those numbers were never the lesson. They were only the classroom. Every thoughtful investment changes two things: your portfolio and the person managing it. Charlie Munger often said, "Spend each day trying to be a little wiser than you were when you woke up." That's the real compounding. Better judgment, better discipline, better decisions. Money can be lost, markets can fall, businesses can fail. But a person who has learned how to think can build again. Because the greatest investment return isn't measured only in dollars. It's measured in the investor you become. And that brings us to the real secret behind this entire journey. When this series began, it looked like we were asking one simple question. What would I do with $10,000? Then $50,000, $70,000, $90,000, and finally, $100,000. But here's what I hope you've discovered. Those numbers were never the lesson. They were only examples. The real lesson was learning how to think. Warren Buffett once said, "The most important investment you can make is in yourself." I believe that idea reaches beyond education or careers. It includes your judgment, your patience, your integrity, and the discipline to make thoughtful decisions, even when no one is watching. Wealth is rarely built by one extraordinary investment. It's built by ordinary decisions, made consistently, over many years. Every dollar you earn will eventually ask you the same question: what would you like me to become? Answer that question wisely. Build things that create value. Invest in your character as much as your portfolio. Be patient enough to let time work with you instead of against you. And remember, money is temporary. Character is transferable. Wisdom compounds. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, keep thinking long term.